The so-called Steinmeier Formula is a peace plan drawn up by the former German foreign minister in 2016. According to the formula, a special status would be granted to the currently occupied territory of Donbas, with strict conditions in accordance with the Minsk Accords. The 2014 law specifying the status will expire at the end of 2019, having never been applied thus far. On October 1st this year, President Zelensky stated that Ukraine had agreed to implement this roadmap. The news sparked criticism and speculation that the president felt the need to address the nation in an attempt to clear the air.
A temporary law on the special order of local government in separate districts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. It is also known in society as the Donbas Special Status Law. It will permanently enter into force under one condition. Now please listen carefully. Only under the condition of holding local elections on those territories that comply with the constitution and legislation of Ukraine, as well as only after the publication of the OSCE report that the elections were held according to OSCE standards and international standards of democratic elections.
This whole story that the Kremlin has set into motion pursues one goal only: to use any premise to hold the elections that will be approved by Kyiv. How they take place, what kind of result they will yield, the sense in them, the date. The Kremlin couldn't care less about any of this. The Kremlin understands very well that all of those self-proclaimed leaders that they installed, as far as the Constitution and the international law is concerned, are a bunch of nobodies.
The letter signed on October 1st in Minsk and sent to the head of OSCE, Martin Saidik, focused on the local elections in the occupied territories. However, critics say many issues that need to be resolved prior to holding any elections have not been addressed in any of the documents drawn up in Minsk.
If we're going to close the border, but how are we going to do it? We're talking about disarming the armed groups. How are we going to do it? And how are the Russians going to assist us as a party in this conflict? Another issue is that Russia refuses to admit to being a party of this conflict. We demand withdrawal of troops. We demand exchange of prisoners of war. This is what we need to begin any kind of negotiations. We have zero guarantees that we'll progress this far. We'd like that. We're striving for it. This is Zelensky's policy. But at war, not everything depends on you. There's also the opponent.
The next regular local elections in Ukraine are scheduled for 2020. Will internally displaced Ukrainians from Donbas be able to have a say electing local authorities in what, in theory, should once again become their home? This is just one of many questions to be answered before the Ukrainian government attempts to organize elections on a territory it currently has no control over. Olga Ivazovska from the NGO Opora tells us the history of similar conflicts and says it will take at least a full year after a definitive peace deal is signed before any kind of election campaign can be launched.
A democratic vote requires security. That's demilitarization, pacification. That means a state program for reconciliation needs to be implemented because people can be at each other's throats. An election in itself is a crisis, a conflict, which can add fuel to the conflict that will remain on the emotional level. Obviously, there also needs to be demining, and it's not physical access of journalists. Ukrainian media presence need to be restored in the area. Ukrainian political parties, the whole system. The judicial branch needs to be restored, the banking system.
With the old law on the status of the Donbas expiring on December 31st, the new one will likely be a key discussion point at the much-anticipated Normandy Format meeting. The original version was written in 2014, when the presence of regular Russian troops on the ground in Donbas was reported on by Western media outlets. The law adopted by the Ukrainian parliament contains a number of provisions seen by many as unacceptable, including a high level of legal autonomy for the region, as well as amnesty for those involved in the fighting on the Russian side. 5 years later, some believe the balance of power in this conflict has changed enough to demand that many such provisions lobbied by Moscow to be excluded from the new law.
Ukraine will never agree to allow persons who committed war crimes or other crimes to run in the elections. But there are other categories that didn't commit crimes connected with using arms or participation in armed groups, and yet they still don't know what awaits them, legally speaking. They work there in the government service or were in charge of schools.
According to a recent poll, 48% of Ukrainians are strongly against amnestying the Russian-led militants, and only 23% support granting the currently occupied parts of the Donbas autonomy, whatever that entails. Reported by Olga Mikhaluk for UATV.